Hi everyone, this is Sue Erickson. I am Associate Hub Director for OpenLearning 18, which is a CMOOC, and we are about halfway through OpenLearning 18. This is the week on the Framework for Information Literacy, and I am facilitating this week's learning. This is the last of our live events for the week. Previously, we had a Google Hangout with Trudy Jacobson and Craig Gibson, and that is up on the YouTube site and will be up on the Hub site, the Open Learning Hub, if it's not already. So I encourage you to tune into that, the archived version. But today I have a few folks with me from the Engaging with the Framework Roadshow from ACRL. And I have Jenny Dale, who is Information Literacy Coordinator at UNC Greensboro, Samantha Godby, Education Librarian at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Kim Pittman, Information Literacy and Assessment Librarian at University of Minnesota, Duluth. And I want to thank Jenny, Samantha, and Kim for being with us today. It's exciting to have you here. And I have some questions for you about the roadshow. So can you tell us a little bit about how the concept of Engaging with the Framework Roadshow came about? What was the need that it was trying to fill?
So I'll start here, but I will also give you the caveat that the three of us are all newer presenters, so we weren't actually involved in the first stage of the process. So the way that I understand it, though, and others can certainly chime in, is that the framework has certainly been a big topic of discussion for quite a few years now. And there was enough discussion around it that I think the ACRL really wanted to put some resources into training people, not necessarily training, that's not really quite the right word, but engaging people with the framework, like the title of the roadshow indicates. And there were three original content creators, curriculum designers, and those people are Brittany Johnson, who couldn't join us today. That's why I was like, if Brittany were here, she'd have a great answer to this question. Brittany Johnson from St. Edward's University. We also have Lindsay Matz Benson from the University of Minnesota as well, different campus though, right? Yes, and and then also Andrea Bayer, who's from the University of West Georgia. So they were the three original curriculum designers. They created the entire workshop, and after the workshop was created, they brought in 4 additional presenters because there had been really high interest from different campuses and organizations in bringing the roadshow to them. So I don't know if y'all have anything else to add to that. We weren't there at the beginning, so we're like the new kids on the block.
I would add that in conversations with Chase Allis, who is our program officer with ACRL, that there just has been a lot of interest in professional development around the framework. People have been really eager to engage with the framework, to have conversations about how to actually work with this theoretical document and integrate that into their instruction. And so, as Jenny mentioned, they put together this program, and now there's quite a lot of interest in bringing this workshop to different campuses.
Great. Anything you want to add, Kim?
No, I think that's a really good overview. There was just a lot of demand. I know it's a big enough shift from the standards to the framework that people definitely were looking for resources and support and kind of some guidance in how to move ahead. So that was the impetus for this.
Great. And so it sounds like the three of you were kind of part of maybe phase 2 of the team. How did each of you get involved in being part of the team?
Well, there was a call, so some of the attendees today may have seen it on the different listservs, but ACRL put out a call for presenters. And so after that, because you can imagine, they put together a team of 7 to do the presenting so that we have plenty of people available to provide the workshop. But as you can imagine, having 7 people work to create the create the content is maybe not the most efficient route. So they started with a few people with different expertise related to curriculum design, and they put together the curriculum, and we responded to a call and interviewed with ACRL, and also the process that we've followed with the original designers. They did the first presentations of the workshop. They did a trial run at ALA, or maybe, yeah, at ALA. They had a workshop.
ACRL.
Was it ACRL? I'm forgetting which.
Yeah, it's like a short version.
Yes, at ACRL. Thank you. But they did a trial run on the curriculum, got some feedback. They did the first iterations of the workshop. And then once we were brought on, we've gone through the process of each of us shadowed a workshop with 2 of the original designers presenting, and then each of us does a workshop with one of them, and then we're able to do it with each other. So we have kind of a I do, you do, the we do kind of we do, I do, we do, you do kind of model to get all of us up to speed and comfortable with the content.
And it sounds like you go out in pairs. Is that right?
We do.
Yes. Okay. Can you talk a little about the format of the workshop? Is it pretty hands-on?
It's very hands-on. Kim, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of opportunities for individual reflection. And then the whole second half of the workshop allows participants to develop a lesson plan drawing on the framework and the theories that inform it. So it's really practical in that way. And people have a lot of chances to discuss with each other and learn together.
And so, and Kim kind of mentioned this, like how the second half is more hands-on. The morning is hands-on as well, and in terms of like we really integrate reflection and discussion throughout, but the morning has more emphasis on the theory and understanding the framework and the ideas that went into its creation, so that people kind of have that grounding in understanding the document as they do the work kind of in the second half of the workshop to actually design some instruction for their own practice.
So what do you think a typical participant might walk away with at the end of the day from the workshop?
I think people walk away with lots of different things. We get feedback. There's an evaluation of each workshop. So we do get to see that feedback and kind of see the reactions that people had and kind of what they drew from it. I'm thinking though of when I was doing my observation, where I observed Lindsay Matz-Vincent and Andrea Baer. And so I was really kind of participating in the workshop. So I can really speak for myself there, because I used that afternoon time to actually go through the activity that was, that was part of the workshop, and actually redesigned a series of assignments for a credit course that I teach. But one of the things that I really love is how flexible it is, because the other people that I saw when I was observing, and also in one that I led, I mean, people were looking at like larger curriculum issues, like their whole program. Some people were looking at one shot. And the flexibility there, I think, is really, it's a huge asset for a program like this, because you want it to be kind of everything to everyone, and that's of course impossible, but there is at least something that everyone can use to apply to their practice. One of the one of the ones that it was actually one that I led, there was sort of a group of archivists there, and they kind of broke off and went and worked together and talked about how they could sort of look at their programming and their instruction that they do with the framework in mind. So everybody is really getting something different out of it. But everyone, I think, the goal really is for everyone to leave with something tangible, something implementable, whether, again, it's a lesson plan for a one-shot workshop or an activity or an assignment or something like that. So.
Yeah, I would add to that too. I think it really helps people leave with a better understanding of the theories that inform the framework, which is something that I think a lot of people are intimidated by initially. We hear some feedback from people who feel the framework has jargon or is difficult to understand on the first go round. So I think the workshop does a really nice job of making it approachable and helping people see how they can apply it in their own context.
Right. And for those of you tuning in live, I just want to remind you that we are on Twitter with the hashtag OpenLearning18. And if you have questions for the group today, if you will send them in through Twitter, hashtag OpenLearning18, I'll be monitoring that and can share the questions with the group. So how do I find out if there's a roadshow near me?
That's a great question. And I think that every host, from what I can tell, is advertising it a little bit differently. So the first one that I observed, actually, I was lucky enough to have it be in North Carolina, where I live. So I saw it go out. It went out on our state listserv, our State Library Association listserv. I kind of saw it being shared around just sort of person to person. I know one that I co-led in Kentucky, there was like a kind of a library programming, almost like a consortium, and they sponsored it. They kind of got it all organized, and so they did all of the sort of recruitment, but they sent it out to all the libraries in the University of Kentucky system. So I think people are doing a lot of different things, but they're pretty big crowds for a workshop, 60, 75 people, and a lot of times people are kind of sending teams in from their institutions.
So I'm sorry, is it generally multiple institutions joining in?
It varies. An institution or a group of institutions can host a workshop. You do pay licensing fees to ACRL, and you pay for the presenter's travel. So it is an investment. So often institutions will do, a group of libraries nearby, or kind of a regional group will join together just to help share in the costs of bringing the workshop. People who are interested in attending the workshop also can keep an eye out. Like, for example, Lindsay and I just led a workshop at Midwinter. We led a day-long pre-conference at the Midwinter conference. So we are trying to also provide opportunities like that one in case your institution or nearby isn't an option for you. That way you can attend it as an individual.
Anybody else have anything to add on that? So that kind of leads into my next question, which is what's involved from the hosting angle? In other words, if I want to bring the roadshow to my institution or to my area, what am I getting myself into?
So Samantha mentioned the host does pay a licensing fee and provide funds for the presenter's travel. They also coordinate the space for the workshop, so making sure there's a space that's big enough to accommodate however many people you're expecting. And then providing some AV support, printing workbooks, and communicating with the presenters about the workshop and kind of what they're hoping to get out of it, I think are the main components. Anybody else wants to add to that?
I think that those are the primary responsibilities of the host institution or institutions.
Because so in addition to the logistics, the communicating with participants, so we do ask participants to do a bit of pre-work. We provide some readings to help give people kind of a foundation before the workshop, and we do a pre-survey so that we can tailor the workshop as needed based on kind of the experience of the attendees. So that's another responsibility of the host to do that communication to participants as well.
Cool. What's your favorite thing about being part of the Roadshow? And if you'll each definitely respond to this one, I think that'll be great.
I can start. I really enjoy so far, and I've only actually observed a workshop. I do my first one here in a few weeks. I'm really excited about getting to talk to people from different kinds of institutions about the framework. There's such a big emphasis in the framework on local customization and implementation that I think it's really fun to hear about how other folks are approaching it and thinking about using the framework. I also am really excited to be part of the presenter team. I think it's a really great group, and I'm really excited to learn from everybody in terms of how they approach facilitating the workshop, and then also just learning about how you all, approach the framework at your own institutions.
Next.
I can go next.
Okay.
It's largely like a repeat of what Kim said. I really enjoy facilitating the workshops. I mean, I've observed one, and as I said, I just led my first one at Midwinter. And I've done a number of workshops on my own or with colleagues, not affiliated with ACRL. So I have some experience with doing workshops on the framework already, and I love meeting new people and talking to them about their experiences at their institutions, because as people know, it varies so much from institution to institution, and just even role within your institution. And so it's really exciting to get to meet people and learn from them, and also to help them be less afraid of the framework. I just really, I am excited by this document and think it has a lot of potential to help us think differently about our instruction, and to approach in our workshop description, it talks about the evolving instruction roles of librarians, and really, our roles are changing. So I like playing a part in kind of helping people make some steps in that, with each other. And the team of people is really fantastic, and I've enjoyed getting to know people. We have meetings ourselves to reflect and revise and do a better job with our work. So being a part of this team is really kind of gratifying and happy work for me.
Yeah, I think really, honestly, everything that both Kim and Samantha have said, I agree with. And one of the things that I feel really like even though I'm not a creator of this workshop, I wasn't one of the designers, I'm really proud to be associated with this workshop, because it's the kind of workshop that I would get a lot out of as a participant. And it's the kind of training opportunity that I seek out to really kind of dig in for a day and come away with something that I can use. And I don't always feel, not every workshop is like that, and they're not all meant to be like that, but this one, that's the whole purpose here. And I think that it works. And one of the things that I also really like, and this is particularly with the three creators, they worked really hard on creating this curriculum, but they have been completely willing to say, here's what's not working. or here's what could be working better. And so it's been a very like living curriculum up to this point. I think, we've gotten it to a pretty, we're trying not to make any really major changes at this point. But it's one of those things where it's really good to be part of a really responsive presenter team to say, well, because it's really, I mean, when you teach a lot, like many of us do, and I'm sure many of the people who are possibly wanting this do, it's really easy to not be able to take the time to do that, to say, here's something I know isn't working quite like I'd want to, and how can I fix it? And a lot of times we just don't have the space or the capacity to do that when we're going from one thing to another. And maybe it's a one shot and there's one right after it and one right after that. And which is kind of, what my life has been like in my job. It's really refreshing to be able to be responsive like that, and be responsive to comment and feedback from the people participating in the workshop. And it's also made me, it's made me think about things differently in my day job, right? In my regular work, where I can kind of bring some of these principles of design that we use in this presenter team to bear in my sort of day-to-day work.
That leads right into my next couple of questions, so that's great. Could you each talk a little bit about how you use the framework in your day job? Not so much the roadshow, but how do you use it in your day-to-day work, since you are all instruction librarians of one flavor or another?
So I can start again. I guess for me, one of the big things has just been kind of shifting focus from focusing on students' research skills and like what can they do, what do they need to be able to do, and thinking more about like the big concepts and understandings behind those skills, which is a pretty big shift. And I'm not going to suggest that we've like nailed this already and we're done. It's still something my instruction program is definitely working on. But to try to achieve that, we have revised our information literacy learning outcomes pretty substantially based on the framework. And we've done a lot of work to revise our first year writing course information literacy components to try to make them a little more focused on those big concepts from the framework, and kind of reflect the approaches there. Probably the other biggest area where I can see the framework in my daily work or my regular work would be with assessment. In the past, we really focused on using artifacts that would show us like if a student could do something, if they couldn't do a particular task. So we looked at a lot of worksheets and things like that from library sessions. And so drawing on the framework, we've tried to focus a bit more on the affective component of learning and look at more pieces of reflective writing that show us kind of how students experience the research process, where they get stuck, and really like what their feelings are about the process. So we've done some of that, and we've also started, for assessment purposes, gathering more work from that students produce after library sessions, so we can see how they progress over time and kind of that like novice to expert progression that the framework talks about. So definitely some big shifts in our first year instruction and assessment in general.
I'll go next. It's fine. So I love this question. So when the framework original drafts were being released, I had so much anxiety about the framework. And I feel like that's something that I like to share when I do these workshops, because I think that when you come in as, like a licensed presenter on something like this, I always assume that, those people are like, oh, well, they're experts and they're like 100% on board. And like from day one, they were like ready to roll with this huge shift. And I wasn't ready to roll with this huge shift. And I was interested in it. And I'm really I've always been really into teaching and learning and into pedagogy and into these kinds of ideas. So that made it a little more accessible for me. But I was extremely anxious about what this would look like in a practical application. And one of the things that actually really helped me was I took a Library Juice Academy class with Andrea Baer, who was one of the original content creators for this workshop as well. And she kind of helped. Even through that whole process, I was like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I've got to change everything. I've got to change like everything that I've ever done in a class, which is pretty ridiculous. So I don't know quite where that was coming from, but it was happening. So one of the things that I really got out of that, and that's really shaped the way I use the framework, is to make small changes. We're making big changes too, some of the same kind of things that Kim just mentioned. I've been in the process for over a year now of trying to change our student learning outcomes to be more aligned with the framework, which is tough. I'm finding that process to be tough because I know when I initially started presenting on the framework at our state library conference in 2015, I guess, was one of the first times I did a presentation on it. One of my colleagues at a different school in the university system here in North Carolina came up to me and said, you know, I'm not sure what to do. We just got everybody on board with the standards. How are we going to, like, what are we going to do with this? And so I think that's been really interesting to me throughout, to think about. I was initially thinking, okay, how can I map this back to the standards? And I'm trying to move away from that, because I think it's not just, you know, we didn't just change the name of a document. It's a huge sort of transformative shift in the way that we think about the work that we do. But that doesn't mean that it all has to happen at once. And that was the kind of the sticking point for me, was to think like, okay, I need to go from standards to framework, and it needs to be done, and it needs to be like in one day, and I've got to figure out how this is going to happen. So I've made a lot of small changes that I think kind of snowball into something larger, particularly in like the kinds of questions that I ask students in a class, particularly about some of the framework concepts. Like, you know, I've always asked questions that deal with this idea of authority, and the idea that authority is constructed and contextual, but I've changed my language around that. And I think I'm getting at, like, I think it's helping me be a better teacher. And I think it's also helping me make stronger connections for the students that I work with. The other thing that I have found really valuable about the framework in my day-to-day work is it's slowing down a little bit for me now. So I've shifted jobs or shifted roles, but until last, yes, so I spent 7 years as a first-year instruction librarian at this institution, UNC Greensboro, and I loved that work, but that's heavy burnout kind of work. I was teaching like average of 150 sessions a year, and it was just kind of really, it was wearing on me as a human, as a teacher, as like someone who's like, I can't think of anything new to say. So this, like, using the framework has actually been a good way for me to help me be a little more reflective, to help me combat some of that burnout, and to help me, it has encouraged me to like try some different things in the classroom that give me that variety, that makes it a little bit easier to say, like, you know, okay, I can get through this day or this week because I can try some new stuff. I have a little bit of flexibility, and I've used it that way a lot for myself. And that's one of the ways I encourage the first-year instruction librarians here who now report to me. I've encouraged them to kind of work with that, work with it in that way as well.
So I am a relatively new librarian. This is my 6th year as a librarian. Before that, I was a high school English teacher. So I don't have some of the anxiety and reluctance that some people have experienced. Like I hadn't worked with the standards for years and years, and you know, so Before the framework happened, one of my colleagues, like in my first year as a librarian, attended a session at ACRL on information literacy threshold concepts and came back super excited. And the three of us who were doing all the instruction for our large first year science course decided to integrate one of those concepts into like this massive, our instruction for this massive course. And we had a series of sessions with the students. And so we, like very early on, had played around with integrating these larger theoretical concepts into practical instruction. Like that also helps students gain research skills. And so then
we have gale force winds here today. Yeah. That was the back door slamming.
So then the framework started happening. The drafts came out. Like everybody's talking about threshold concepts. Everybody's talking about the framework. So for me, like especially with my background as a teacher, who like my graduate program in education like had a really strong constructivist approach, and really like how I learned to teach emphasized like the individual nature of each student and their learning experience, and how it's really up to each learner to construct their knowledge based on their existing knowledge, their existing like prior experiences. And so like for me, like the standards, like, and I've worked with standards as a teacher too, but like standards like ultimately aren't that helpful in kind of crafting a learning experience to me. Like, sure, like I can have a list, like I can always slap on some like standards like to a lesson plan. Like I'm going to cover that stuff. I'm going to talk to them about how to do certain things. So for me, like the framework, like having these bigger ideas to like have conversations with people and conversations with students, and also conversations with faculty around like the bigger picture of what, like why it matters and how these things can apply to different contexts. Like we talk in the workshop a lot about learning transfer, which is one of the ideas that went into the creation of the framework. Like really, like that's our job. It's not just to give them certain skills in a session or in a course, but to help students like think about things differently in ways that they can carry with them into other situations, into other courses for their degree, or into their personal lives after they finish school. And so, so I didn't have, like, I was excited about it when it happened. And I just, like I said, like, I don't have a whole lot of emotional attachment to the previous way of doing things. And I, in general, I like new ideas. And I don't feel like having the framework, like it means like it is the absolute end all answer to everything. Just like I didn't think the standards were, but I like having the opportunity to think about things in different ways. And so for me, just in my instruction, so I am our education librarian. So I do a lot of instruction in our College of Ed, and with our psychology department is mine too. And so like Jenny and Kim have mentioned, like, you know, like when I'm doing instruction, it just kind of, it has affected how I think about it, how I think about my goals. It's affected the kinds of questions I ask students. So like, as I'm doing assessment, you know, even at like a minute paper, something like emphasis is less on, you know, the properly formatted APA citation, like, or like demonstrating certain concrete skills, which happens. But even if I do that, like if I ask that kind of question, I also like have something that's more reflective, or like, you know, kind of metacognitive, where they can think about what they learned and why that matters. It also affects, like, I do quite a lot of research consultations, especially with grad students. We have students, so I work with students from first year, college freshmen through doctoral students. And I do a lot of consultations one-on-one with my grad students, especially. And so having thought a lot about these ideas has affected the conversations I have with students. Certain ones of these ideas in the framework resonate more, like with my grad students, like especially like, kind of they're working on adopting that identity as scholars, and how do they fit into that. I have a lot of students who have been out of the classroom for a long time. I have people who have a whole career as an educator and are back in school. And what does that mean for them? What does it mean, like, in terms of how they, like, them as creators of information? And that's something that was, that is very much like a new thing, an addition in the framework, like really that emphasis on not just information users, but on creators of information and the responsibilities that go with that. And I guess, like, the last thing I would mention is that I'm lucky in that we're also faculty here at UNLV. And so I have expectations around service and scholarship, as well as my library duties. And so my research has, like, I've done quite a lot around the framework. As I mentioned, I've done workshops on the framework and presentations on, like, where I get to reflect on my experience with the framework. And I also recently, ACRL published a co-edited book that I worked on with a couple of colleagues, looking at disciplinary applications of information literacy threshold concepts. And that was a really great experience, kind of wonderful in, for some of the similar reasons that it's great to do these workshops, because I got the chance to interact with a lot of librarians from around the world about how they're integrating the framework into their instruction.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that not everyone has anxiety about the framework, but I am also grateful for Jenny's honesty about where that anxiety came from, and recognizing that it was there. And as I was listening to you all, I was thinking about how prevalent the idea of library anxiety is in our professional literature. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe we need to link our own anxiety about new things like the framework with library anxiety. There might be some overlap there, and maybe we could take our own advice in how to manage that anxiety as we've developed that for our students who have library anxiety. Well, my last question is, so you've talked about how you use the framework in your day-to-day work, and I'm wondering, how has your experience in being part of the Roadshow, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, but I'll just ask you to say a little bit more about it. How has your experience in being part of the Roadshow shaped the work that you do when you're kind of back at the ranch?
I know for me, one of the really big things that's changed how I approach, I've always been really interested in instructional design. I was an instructional design librarian before I was a first-year instructional librarian. But it's really the understanding by design framework, the Wiggins and McTeague framework, that was really kind of used to create the framework, and also was used by our colleagues to create this workshop. So that is it's a backward design model. And again, kind of going back to, like, my personal anxieties about things. One of the things I like about understanding by design that's changed the way I look at even, like, kind of learning kind of broadly, but also, like, specifically in my contexts, is this idea that it is actually okay to start with a big idea or a big understanding that you want students to have or you want your learners to have. Again, like sort of my training with the standards and with assessment was like, oh, you write a student learning outcome and you sure don't use the word understand in a student learning outcome because you can't measure that. So again, kind of getting over that and being able, it's helped me take a broader view of, okay, well, I know maybe I can't do an assessment that says students understand authority, but that can be my goal. That can be sort of my large kind of enduring understanding that I want students to take away from their experiences with information, with evaluating information, not just in my 50-minute session that I get to do with them, but to kind of encourage that, as you know, the framework uses the terminology dispositions to kind of encourage that, those habits of mind that are so important to being kind of a good consumer and producer of information. So being in observing the workshops and then presenting the workshop, I had to get a lot more familiar with sort of the process of that understanding by design model. And it's just been like very transformative in the way that I approach my own instructional design. So that's been a huge part of it for me.
I will say that I don't know that like being part of the roadshow has really changed much for me, just because like I was hoping that you guys would give me some ideas about what has changed for me, but like the understanding by design, like that, following that model is something that I've worked with a lot in the past. And as I said, I've already done quite a lot of work with the framework, and so I don't know, it's just kind of a reinforcement of some of the things that I've already done in the past. The big benefit for me is what I've already mentioned, which is that opportunity, like that if we have this curriculum and we take it somewhere, and then like there's all these like different people each time, and so we get to learn from them and learn about their experiences at their institutions. So sometimes that makes me like extra grateful to work where I am, like because I do have there's a lot of wonderful things about the instruction program where I am and about some of the opportunities I have here. Sometimes I'm envious of other people's situations. Also just, you know, the people will help me think about things in different ways. So for me, that's, I think, the big benefit is just that chance to interact with people.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Jenny and Samantha have said. Understanding by design, learning more about that approach has been useful for me, both in my own teaching practice and then also working with librarians on my campus to kind of model a process that they can also use. I think, yeah, what Samantha's saying about the opportunity to learn from and hear from folks at the workshops is really great. I have a library school friend who always used to say that teaching is stealing. And I really like the, you know, idea that you can always take ideas from others and build on those and apply them in your own context. So I think doing that with workshop participants and also just our presenter team has been really useful as well. So I definitely feel like, you know, everything that I'm doing to prepare for the workshops, and then once I'm there, what I'm learning from participants can really feed into what I'm doing on a regular basis here. I think it also kind of motivates me to make sure that we are implementing the framework and kind of moving ahead and reflecting on that at my own institution. So I don't feel like I'm going to these workshops and encouraging people to do things that I'm not doing myself. So it's been helpful in that way as well.
Great. Last question I have is, do any of you have strategies for working with non-librarian faculty or teaching faculty in terms of using the framework and helping them figure out how to incorporate some of the concepts from the framework into their courses, even when a librarian isn't the one standing up in front of the room doing the teaching?
I would say, you know, we've already mentioned the jargon criticism of the framework. There is some language in there that is imprecise. You know, is not so straightforward to share with someone. So trying to share these ideas in ways that are more approachable for faculty. And for me, you know, it's been helpful, you know, always like the student comes first. So sharing it, framing it in that, with that goal to, you know, help students like with deeper learning that can, you know, that can be transferred. And yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
Anyone else want to respond to that one?
I'd say that's the piece of implementing the framework that I'm sort of hoping to tackle next at my own institution, is doing more faculty development. So I can't speak to it too much yet. I can say that in a lot of initial conversations with faculty about the framework, a lot of folks do find the bigger concepts pretty relatable. And so I have had some good success just starting conversations around these concepts. I think it can be a starting point just to focus on kind of open-ended discussion with faculty and finding out what their responses are, how the framework connects to what they're doing in their classrooms. I think there's kind of a misconception that you have to feel like an expert about the framework before you can begin a conversation with faculty about it. And I do think we can approach it as something that we're learning together and tackling together, not something where I have to have all the answers and bring them to non-librarian faculty.
The most that I've done in this area is, I mean, I have a few faculty members who are just really into that kind of thing, who have, I've mentioned it and they've like really kind of hooked onto it, which is great. But the most sort of systematic thing that I have done in the past couple of years is introducing it to new graduate teaching assistants, particularly in our English composition or college writing program, as well as our introduction to, it's an introductory communication course. Those are sort of our two big first year instruction courses that we work with, and particularly with the composition course, there are so many nice connections between this and the framework for success in post-secondary writing, which is sort of from the writing program administrators organization, where they've kind of written this framework that's similar. There's a lot of there's some overlapping language, but a lot of overlapping ideas as well. And since that's a document that I know that those teaching assistants will come across, I try to make that connection when I kind of give them a little orientation to the library support element. And that's not my role anymore. We have someone else who does that, but she's has kind of has folded that into her orientations as well, because you can make some really concrete connections between the sort of knowledge practices and habits of mind there and the kind of things that come up in the framework for success in post-secondary writing. So I think when you can find those little connections to disciplinary documents or disciplinary frameworks, I think it's really helpful. And there are some disciplinary faculty on my campus who are really into threshold concepts and things like that. So, you know, those are the kind of places that I try to kind of informally make those connections.
I think one of the important things that each of you has touched on is thinking about using the framework in instructional settings that are kind of beyond the traditional library instruction setting. At my institution, we actually used the framework when we were asked to help promote our university's intellectual property policy to students. And so we used the student as creator theme to help get across to our first year students as part of an orientation session that they are creators, and what they create at our university they own, which of course isn't the same across institutions, but that's our policy. And so that's how we helped them make sense of that policy. And I think that's worked well for us. So, you know, a bit outside of that traditional instruction mode, you've talked about research consultations and so forth, things that have an instructional component, but maybe aren't a traditional, you know, one-shot instruction session or an information literacy course. So if we can think about the framework and incorporate it into all the ways that we do instruction with students and with faculty development, I think that's a great way to bring it in. Well, we are getting close to our end time. Is there anything else the three of you would like to share with our audience about anything that we've talked about today?
I did just notice a question on the Twitter about whether the roadshow is something non-librarians can benefit from.
Oh, that's a great question.
The emphasis is definitely on librarians, but I do think that non-librarians could benefit. Like, as we said, the beginning is the first half really emphasizes the helping people to understand and kind of contextualize the different theories that went into the creation of the framework. And as you do the work of, like for many people, that's designing a lesson plan or a series of instructional experiences. As you do that work, there's a lot of, you know, you can make that your own. So if it were a non-librarian who didn't have, you know, if it's teaching faculty, they could certainly, you know, kind of follow it precisely as written. If it's more someone who is a program coordinator or in some other role on campus, they could use that opportunity to still follow that backwards design, like, you know, set a goal and kind of backtrack to that in terms of what, you know, how to get there.
I will say the workshop that I observed had faculty members, non-librarian faculty members, primarily from their college writing composition program participated. And I think part of that was because it was hosted just by one campus, and it was like paid for, I think, entirely by some administrative unit in that campus. So participants didn't have to pay. So I think they were able to open it up a little bit more on the campus. So there were several people who teach in their college writing or first year writing. I can't remember what. There's, you know, something different everywhere, what it's called there. But, and then there were also some instructional designers for the campus who was, I think, especially work with online coursework who attended. But, you know, it is really, it's geared towards librarians. I think librarians would get the most out of it.
Anything else? Anybody wants to add? Okay, well, I want to thank Jenny, Samantha, and Kim for being with us today. This has been just great. I feel like we've gotten a much better understanding of what the Roadshow is all about and how we might benefit from that if we have a chance to participate. So thank you so much for being part of Open Learning 18 in this our framework for Information Literacy Week. And I hope everyone stays tuned for next week in Open Learning 18 when we'll be focusing on open access. So stay tuned and keep following that Twitter tag, #OpenLearning18.